fix my audio. I think we're gonna start on our and get comfy. Let's make that happen. And yeah, just whatever feels most ideal for you. So knees can be bent, legs can be extended. Anything that is benefiting you this morning. And then we'll just settle into a breath that lets your body expand. Maybe encourages your body to expand would be a better way to describe that. And then lets your body release into that expansion you've created on the exhale side. So the inhale is this encouragement of expansion. And the exhale is this full release, this melting into the mat beneath you. Maybe you let the eyes close here. The most I'm not going to define what's the most important. I think what the intention is to feel the expansiveness upon the inhale, to craft and create that expansiveness, and then to just release into the exhale. And maybe then we drift into the appreciation that we experience from that nourishment on the inhale, or of that nourishment on the inhale. And then we settle and release into that exhale. And let's allow about 60 more seconds just to feel into that. Really drawing your breath so that the lung cavity expands. Last 30 seconds here. And then as you take your next inhale breath, let's bring our knees into a bent position if they're not already there. And then we are going to bring the palms and the elbows together overhead. And this is a little bit of a challenging kind of setup, and the details really matter here. So elbows are going to be elbow pit is going to be directly in front of your field of vision. And so the hands are above the head, right? They're much higher than the elbow positioning. And we want to lock in this positioning because we're really going to use this to expand this lateral capacity. So with your next exhale, take your left elbow to your right hand. So you're sliding that left arm forward, not pulling the right elbow back, really sliding that left elbow forward and then relaxing back. And then we'll do the same thing. Inhale to that second side. So right elbow goes forward, and you want to feel that lat expansion as you do so. And then relax back. And same thing as we go to the left side. Again, you really want to make sure that the elbow is going up and not the opposite hand pulling down. That's where we lose kind of the potential for benefit here. And then just alternate at your own breath. And I'll see if I can do a better demo here. It's just really sliding up. There's not a lot, for many of us, I should say, there's not a lot of movement capacity. And it's just because that lateral chain is so tacked down, that intercostal musculature, that weave of soft tissue attached to the rib cage does not get a lot of opportunity to expand in this vertical pull while being tacked down. So this is a really fun opener that I discovered this week. This week-ish, maybe it was last week. In the last 2 weeks, I'm going to say. But I've loved it. And maybe one more to each side. Just trying to get that lateral expansion really deep into that sublat musculature. And then we'll release the arms out towards cactus. And as you do so, really think about how this upper portion of the torso, pec major and pec minor, into the shoulder capsule can really just fall into this open alignment. And then go back to that cycle of breath that we started class with that big full inhale that inflates the lung cavity. And then exhales back into that softness. And you may note that you now have more capacity to breathe, and you have more capacity to do so with greater ease. So take a moment to just appreciate that little lateral chain expansion that we've offered. And we'll give ourselves just about 20 more seconds here, just breathing into that thoracic expansion, that intercostal expansion. And that lateral chain expansion. And then when you're ready, we're gonna bring the knees back into a bent position if they're not already there, and just give a little lateral sway. So start a little lateral movement just to feel that lower half of the body and its integration with the upper half of the body. Eventually, we'll let both knees fall to one side or the other, whatever side feels most appropriate. And we'll press ourselves up into seat. And from our seat, let's take the bottoms of the feet together. So we end up in this little seated butterfly. We're going to play with the abductor musculature by just giving a little support to the ankles. I turned at the wrong moment. So let's give the ankles some support so that we don't collapse or bow at the ankles. And then with the ankles supported, let's just lift the knees maybe an inch, inch and a half, 2 inches, and hold that and think about leaning back. So hands are again attached to the ankles. If the ankles don't feel like a comfortable grip, you can use the shins or higher up on the knees. But allow your body weight to lean back here. And then draw those hips up a little bit higher into that space. And as you do that, see if you can pull those heels just a little bit closer. Right now, we're taking the pressure off of the abductor musculature with the hands. And then we're going to settle back in. Torso comes forward, weight comes forward. Allow the release of the legs and work your way forward into this seated fold, little modified seated fold with the butterfly hip alignment. And we'll just settle and breathe here. So I am telling a story that isn't mine today. It's one of my favorite stories, though, and it's actually just a very small section of this longer yogic story. And it starts with a king, which hasn't been a king in the story for a very long time. And he's riding with a group of his most trusted confidants to visit this yogi, this very, very powerful yogi. And they have a map, and they've been traveling a great distance to have the opportunity to converse with this yogi. We'll give ourselves about 15 more seconds here. And when you're right, walking ourselves up or pressing ourselves up into a vertical spine alignment, we'll let the legs extend out in front of us. And from staff, we're just going to forward fold. Now, as you take this fold, because we have done no work on that hamstring expression, but we have a ton of upper back space and then some hip space from what we just worked on, you may really feel sticky in the hamstrings. If all of the limitation is coming from the hamstrings, remember to bend those knees and allow the torso to expand into this forward fold shape. Really be willing to let that happen. And let's give ourselves about 60 more seconds here. Really settling in, thinking about the adjustments you can make to soften. Last 15 seconds. And we'll walk ourselves back up into staff. Let's take our left knee and give that a nice bend. Bottom of the left foot comes down to the mat. As this happens, I want you to pay attention to how the glutes are setting here. It's super easy to get off kilter when we go asymmetrical with the legs. So really think about creating a torso engagement that allows for the glutes to be stable and find an equilibrium. And then let the left hand come down behind you and let that right elbow find the left thigh and work back into this twist. As you twist here, we actually have a lot of upper thoracic capacity. So think about how you can rotate more deeply into that space. And then we'll come back to neutral, extend the left leg, follow that forward to a little transitional forward fold, just a reset. And then we'll lift our torso back up to vertical. Right knee bends, bottom of the right foot comes down to the mat, right hand comes down behind you, and the left elbow finds the right thigh. Work your way into that nice full twist. Thinking about using that thoracic capacity for rotation. And then eventually, when you feel balance left to right, working your way back to neutral. And one more time, this transitional forward fold, just finding a reset, and then we'll walk ourselves back up into vertical. We're going to take our ball and our blanket, although I misplaced my ball, so we'll see what we can do here. There we go. And we're going into my favorite neck adjustment. Again, this is another one of these shapes that I've just discovered playing around recently. Ball goes in the middle of that blanket. So from shelf fold to hot dog fold, and then you have a ball right in the middle of that hot dog fold. And we're just headed down so that that ball lands at the base of your skull. It's one of my very favorite passive adjustments, relatively passive adjustments, but I never was able to find a way to hold the ball there unless you had the perfect size and density, and the blanket just makes it so possible. The legs can be wherever, just looking for some solid pressure at the top of the cervical spine, base of the skull. And you can let your eyes close here. You have a lot of control, or you have a relative amount of control, right? The weight of your head is the weight of your head, and that's going to provide some pressure. You can obviously lighten that, although that is fairly straining on the levitator musculature supporting the cervical spine. But you can also increase the pressure, making sure that the cervical spine stays neutral and pressing back so that you add maybe 5-10% of additional engagement there at that pressure point. You can also just passively allow this to happen. So whatever feels most appropriate and most beneficial for you, choose that. And so this king and his trusted guard, they're following this map that they have to this yogi's cave. And they get to this cave way out in the desert, and it has this, the cave entrance has the same marking that is on the map. And so they know they're there. And so the king jumps down and he goes inside and quietly kind of makes his way into this cave. And he sees the yogi in the back of the cave. And the yogi is sitting in perfect stillness and in perfect silence, eyes closed, deep in meditation. And so the king walks back out. He tells his guard, the yogi's in meditation. We're going to wait. And the guard kind of informs the king, we've been traveling a long ways. We don't have a lot of resources left. And the king says, I know. I'm sure that the yogi won't be long. We're just going to wait till he's done meditating. Okay, now we're going to scoot our body up so that that ball comes into the middle of the cervical spine. So that as you reposition your head, you've slightly adjusted up the neck itself, the cervical spine, is being pushed into extension so that the forehead is more in line with the middle of the throat, right? There's a subtle tilt, a subtle lift to the chin here, would have been a more easy way to describe that. And once again, you have those choices, right? You can use the natural weight of your body. You can add some additional pressure, or you can lighten slightly. It's a little bit easier to lighten here because you could just go deeper into extension. Adding more articulature of the spinal column, of the cervical spine, will soften the pressure if that feels appropriate. We'll give ourselves about 40 more seconds here. Middle of the cervical spine, articulation into extension. And when it feels appropriate, we're going to work ourselves even higher onto our mat so that that ball meets the union between the thoracic and cervical spine. And so for many of us, we get this nice bump here, right? Because we spend so much time with our chin down in this full flexion mode, and the thoracic spine is very rigid, and then the cervical spine has a lot of mobility. So we get this big bump right at that thoracic union. We're going to put the ball right there and work into extension just to try to combat that little remix of the human body that technology is working on. And for some of us, this will be the most sensational point. Some of us, maybe. I mean, if you're lucky enough not to spend a lot of time looking down at technology, maybe this just has no sensation at all. We'll give ourselves just about 60 seconds here. It'll be a little shorter than the other two positions. And when you feel complete, let's pull that prop out from underneath us. We'll let our neck come down to neutral. You can take that ball out from in between the hot dog fold as well. And just let the neck settle. Maybe even move the neck left to right. Let it explore the rotational range that's available to it. Maybe just 15 more seconds to just explore what we've crafted here in the neck. And then eventually head comes back to neutral. Let's grab our blanket. We're going to take that from shelf fold and make it towel length. So one unfold, and then we'll just roll that. Easier said than done while you're laying on your back. And it's just going to rest to the side for the moment. You want to have enough room that the knees can go out into a butterfly. So maybe shift that just a little bit higher. And then inhaling to bring the knees into a bent position if they're not already there. Arms can be wherever's comfortable here, absolutely wherever's comfortable. And we're going to take the bottoms of the feet together, knees out wide into that little butterfly shape. And we're going back at the abductor musculature with a little bit of a unique goal. We're going to try to fatigue that. Usually I avoid fatiguing that musculature as much as possible. But today we're going to play with that a little bit. So knees out wide. We'll lift the knees up to maybe like a 1 or 2 inch lift. So kind of like we did when we were seated, but we don't have the hands there taking the pressure off the abductors. So we get a lot more intensity there. And then release the knees all the way back out to full width. And then start the smallest movement you can craft. So maybe like a millimeter of up and down flutter here. Very, very small, refined movements here. And then double that size. So if we're moving a millimeter, we're moving 2 millimeters. It's still quite small. And then double that size again. Still quite small. And then double that size again. And so now, maybe we're into that 1 inch, 1.5 inch of movement. And you may be feeling that abductor musculature pretty intently. And now we're going to go from the movement we're doing to like a half bringing the knees together. So you come up to like halfway to the point where you need to move the knees to come together and then let them fall out wide. And same thing, we're just fluttering to that halfway together point. And doing this with some pretty good fatigue. So really be conscious and focused on this movement. And then 3/4 of the way to knees together. Now the movement is pretty significant, and it's pretty normal for there to be some little like fluttery twitchiness in the musculature as it fatigues, as this is very easily fatigable musculature. And let's do 5 more of these 3/4. And when you are complete with that fifth, the blanket roll is coming over the top of the ankles, tucking around the lateral edge, and we're just falling into the supported butterfly. And this should feel supportive, number one, but it should also feel relatively easy in comparison to our normal supported butterfly. Like you could open deeper, but you're not because of that blanket support. Arms can be wherever is comfortable. Cactus is my recommendation, but anything that feels right for you. And so as this king is waiting for this yogi to come out of meditation, day becomes night, night becomes day, day becomes night, night becomes day. And now the king and his group are really out of water and food and resources. And so the guard comes to the king and they say, we have to move on. King says, I know, but we've traveled so far. I want to leave something for the yogi. And he says, when I went in, there's not much in the cave, but what I did see was this old, very battered copper water vessel. And he reaches onto his saddlebag and he pulls off these 2 jewel encrusted golden water vessels that have the king's symbol on them. Insignia? Symbol? One of those. Either one of those. And he says, I want you to go in and replace his old copper water vessel with these, so at least he'll know we've been here. And so the guard goes in, he picks up this really tattered copper water vessel, and he puts down these 2 golden water vessels. And they ride off, and they ride past this city. And as they're going past this city, this kind of vagabond criminal on the outskirts sees the king and his guard riding through, and he looks at the king's saddlebag and he sees that there's 2 empty spots where his water vessel should be. And so he thinks to himself that they must have fallen off on the ride and no one noticed. And so he starts following these tracks back into the desert, and he follows them all the way to this yogi's cave. And he peeps inside and he sees these 2 insanely valuable golden water vessels sitting on the floor. And he sees in the very back of the cave this yogi sitting with his eyes closed. And he grabs one of the water vessels and he turns to leave the cave. But as he does so, the water vessel he's holding hits the edge of the cave entrance and it makes this loud clang. And he looks back and he sees that the yogi's eyes have popped open, and he just starts running back towards the city. And the yogi gets up and he sees that there's this man running from his cave with this golden water vessel in his hand. And he looks down and he sees another golden water vessel. He picks that up and he starts running after the man. We'll give ourselves just 60 more seconds here. And when it feels appropriate, let's bring our knees back up to neutral so kneecaps can point towards the ceiling. We can take that blanket roll off from the mat, feet, set that to the side, and re-engage our ball. And so we're going to do one last little piece with our hips here. Staying with the hips vertical, so we're not using that abductor musculature. We're going to look for this lateral kind of top edge. Taking our ball, we're just going to look for the spot where the glute med, so the upper glute tissue, kind of transitions into the sacrum area. And we want to be in the soft tissue of the glute. So you're looking, you want to be off that sacral bone and just finding a spot where you can feel the ball pressurize into that high glute. And so glute max, right? Big glute tissue, glute med, this smaller, higher section. That's what we're looking for. And we're just going to find that and then just move laterally across that ball. I'm not sure if I picked a side or not, but just pick one side. We're only going to use one side. I'm on the left side, but if you're on the right, zero problem. We will balance this out and switch this up. But really looking to clean up any of this high glute dysfunction here. And we'll give ourselves about 60 more seconds. This again can be one of those insanely sensational spots. So if you're feeling this deeply, you're certainly not alone. I'm there with you. And when it feels appropriate, we can lift the tailbone high enough to remove that ball, pull both thighs in towards the rib cage. Likely going to feel some asymmetry here in that left and right side. You may even feel how that abductor musculature still has some residual sensations, some twitchiness, some fatigue from our previous work. And then feet come back down to the mat. We'll take the ball over to the second side. Again, looking for that high glute tissue, glute med tissue, looking for some sensational areas, and then just adding some lateral sway, just kind of rolling the torso or the body across the ball. Work out any of that high glute hip dysfunction, glute med hip dysfunction. And so because the yogi's a yogi, he catches up to this man pretty quickly. And as he catches up, he reaches out, he grabs him by the shirt, and the man just crumples to the ground. And he ends up on his knees, and he's like begging up to the yogi from his knees, saying, I'm sorry, I didn't want to steal from you. I'm just trying to feed my family. And the yogi reaches out and he hands him the second of the two golden water vessels, and he says, you forgot this one. And he turns and he walks back to his cave. When he gets back to the cave, he's fairly thirsty from all the running. So he starts looking around for his copper water vessel, and it's nowhere to be found. He knows it was here, and he's pretty sure where he left it. He starts rummaging a little bit deeper, and as he's rummaging in the cave, he disturbs a mouse nest. And as he does so, the mother mouse just runs straight out the cave entrance, never to be seen again. And he looks down in this mouse nest, and there's 5 little baby mice. And he kind of puts his hands on his head and he shakes his head and he's like, I just don't have time for this. Why? What am I going to do? And after some careful thought and deliberation, he realizes he only has one choice. He has to take care of these baby mice. And in any way, he needs a new water vessel. So he heads to town to get some milk and a new water vessel. Last 15 seconds here. And when you're right, you can lift the tailbone high enough to remove that ball. You can set that to the side. Pull both thighs in towards the rib cage one last time for that nice little anterior compression. And then we'll let the feet come down to the mat and let the knees rock a little side to side. Just this flow and movement. Give yourself just about 30 more seconds of this dynamic sway for the hips. Eventually, we're going to let both knees fall over towards the left for a little static twist. And we'll just settle there. Some deep. Full breaths. Similar to the breath that you started class with, now with maybe a little additional restriction in the rotation, but really try to draw into that inhale. And so the yogi makes his way back from town. He's carrying this little dropper, this bottle of milk, and his new copper water vessel. And he gets back and he hears a little commotion into his caves. He pops his head in. He sees that there's a cat. And there are 4 less little baby mice. He shoos the cat out of the cave and he looks down at this one little baby mouse and he's like, oh, the cat could have done me a favor, not left you, but I guess I'll take care of you. And so he feeds this little baby mouse with a dropper. And then he goes to sit in the back of the cave. And he sits down and he closes his eyes and he finds his way into some full and deep meditation. We'll give ourselves just about 10 more seconds here on this first side. And when you feel appropriate, we'll bring our knees back to neutral. Let the bottoms of the feet come together and the knees fall out wide. We won't be here super long. We've already fatigued this musculature, but I want you to feel into that openness of the external rotation of the hips that we've crafted. few moments later, Yogi's eyes are closed. He's just about to drift into that perfect meditative space, and he hears that unmistakable meow and rustling in the cave. We'll bring our knees back to neutral and let them fall over to the second side, the right side. And so he pops open his eyes. He chases the cat away. He looks down at this little mouse. And he knows, anytime that this cat is given the opportunity, he's going to come try to find this last mouse. He knows where it is now. And so he makes a very difficult decision. He decides something that he knows is going to dramatically impact him. He decides he's going to transform the mouse. He's going to use his yogic powers to transform this mouse. And he also knows that by doing so, he's going to lose a lot of his life force. And he's going to shorten his own life. But he just can't come up with a solution other than doing so. So he transforms this mouse. He uses this yogic powers to transform this mouse into a giant dog. And now he knows if the cat comes back around, that this dog will have no problem chasing it off. And so he goes to the back of the cave and he sits down and he closes his eyes and he starts to drift into meditation. And as he does so, the dog kind of wanders out of the cave. And some short amount of time later, he hears this commotion, and then he is, eyes closed, feels this huge weight jump into his lap. And he springs his eyes open, and it's his dog, and it's being chased by this pack of wild dogs. He gets up and he shoos the dogs out, And he looks down and he just cannot believe what has happened. He looks at this giant dog he's created from this little mouse and he's like, oh, this wasn't enough. And so he makes another decision. He's going to use his yogic energy, shorten his life, but solve the problem. And he knows he only wants to do this one more time. So he looks at this dog and he decides, what is the thing that I can change this into that nothing can mess with? And instantaneously it pops in his head, King of the Jungle. And so he transforms this huge dog into this massive lion, the biggest lion that's ever existed. When you're right, when you feel balanced, and when you are ready, we'll bring our knees back to neutral. One last time, we'll let the bottoms of the feet come together and the knees fall out wide. And so he's looking at this massive lion he's created from this tiny mouse, essentially. And he thinks, okay, the problem is solved. I now have a lion to guard my yogic cave. Nothing is going to interrupt my meditation now. And so he goes to the back of the cave, he sits down, he closes his eyes, and he drifts into meditation. When you're ready, let's bring our knees back to neutral. We'll let our eyes close here. Just ask yourself if there's any movement, any final adjustment, any final tweak that you could offer yourself prior to Shavasana. And if there is anything that would be beneficial, offer that now. And if you have everything you need, just drift into some stillness. And so with the yogi deep in meditation, the lion kind of looks around the cave and wanders out, and the lion's thirsty. So it uses its keen sense of smell to smell the closest watering hole. It's not that far away. Why the yogi picked this cave. And so the lion, plods down to this watering hole. And as he's moving, the other animals are just looking in awe in terror of this giant beast. And the lion dips his head down in this perfectly clear pond, and it sees its reflection of itself, this massive lion staring back at it, and it jumps back, it leaps back in fear. And it looks around and it kind of notices that no one else noticed that moment. And it looks down at the reflection again in the water, and it's just trembling with fear. Because inside this lion, there's just a tiny baby mouse. And so the little mouse thinks to itself, everyone else on this planet fears me as a lion, except this one yogi in a cave. And so it turns around and it slowly makes its way back to the cave, just drifting into your version of stillness this morning. So when the lion makes its way back into the cave, it is a very short time later that the yogi's cave is transformed into a lion's den, where the lion lays down with a very full belly. We'll start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes. Up into your wrists and your ankles, through the forearms into the elbows, shoulders and hips, neck, head, jaw, eyes, tongue. Eventually, the entirety of our body moves, and we'll utilize that movement to transition from the shapes we are in back into a seat. And in this seated space, spine gets tall, breath is fluid. Eyes closed. Just feel that space that allows us the freedom to breathe, and that space at the hip hinge. And then we'll inhale our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you ensure that you aren't transforming mouse-sized problems into lion-sized problems? And see how that impacts your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Sunday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you being here. Nice to see you, Robin. Super exciting. Hey, Rob. Heck yeah. Thank you guys so much. Love the heck out of you. I'll be back tomorrow night if you want to move, and we'll do this again next Sunday. Love you. Mwah.